Hello, welcome to a Wonkette bonus chat. It's my honor today to have Claire Willett with us, a Oregon-based playwright, author of the awesome book and the Rewind Files, which I believe she has a copy of to show us.
Yes, it's right here. This is its sexy, exciting cover.
Can you tell us quickly, viewers, what the Rewind Files is? Because it's such a cool book and play and experience. So
the Rewind Files is it's a time travel science fiction adventure story about Watergate. I've always been a huge Watergate junkie. It's sort of, in a way, it's like kind of like All the President's Men fan fiction, really. But it's set about 80 years in the future at a U.S. government bureau time travel agency, and a young desk agent who kind of works mostly, behind a computer all day, sort of accidentally stumbles into a giant decades-long time travel conspiracy that ends up placing her back undercover in Nixon's White House in an alternate timeline where Watergate never happened. It's sort of like, what would American history be now if like Nixon's secrets never got out? Who would be president next? How would America have been different? And so she ends up sort of bumbling into the Watergate break-in, and then history kind of crumbles from there. So and I'm working on 2 sequels right now, which with the same set of characters, but that also explore kind of different slices of Nixon's political career. She's a Nixon specialist, so that's kind of, why him. And I also, and partly just because I sort of have always had a philosophy that like almost everything that we hate about the modern Republican Party can be traced pretty directly back to Nixon. So he's an important one for us to learn about. But yeah, so yeah, second book should be out next year, hopefully. And you could buy Rewind Files now.
Yes, please do. I love it. It's sort of the thing adult me enjoys, but young me definitely loved stories like that, like time travel and history. And
me too.
I'm to really date myself. I was someone who enjoyed the show Voyagers, with the time traveling kid and with the little watch. Yes, look it up. And people who know it will recognize that we are horribly middle-aged if we remember the show. There are certain things that don't endure, like you only remember it if you were there.
Yeah.
It doesn't endure. But it was that Sunday night TV show. I always hoped a strange man would show up at my room and take me off on time travel adventures. Maybe that's why they canceled the show.
Time travel conspiracy, yeah.
Oh, I just remembered so the adult time traveler lost his guidebook to history, and the kid is a nerd, is a history book, and he took the kid with him because he could help him, and wherever they go,
I love that.
And he's like, the kids, why do you have the kid? The kid's the guidebook. So that's what I wanted. It's like, yeah, well, I'm the guidebook. I can help you.
I can do that.
So now that I've gotten this, that I've reestablished that I am the dullest man alive, Claire, can you tell us? You have this awesome. I'm just so excited as someone who's a big fan of yours. Just what you're working on coming out of COVID. There was a period. I admit I was really moved. I saw a photo of you in the space with other actors doing the reading, and it felt to me like, oh my God, she's back, she's there, and I felt like this was something that. Can you tell us a bit about this, because I felt like it was a long time coming.
I've been my first sort of venture back into live theater since the pandemic is I am currently working on or it's just opened last night, a new play at University of Portland. It's called How Can I Keep Singing? And I'm their first ever playwright. So they've never commissioned a play to be written specifically for their students before, which is really exciting. I mean, exciting for me to be it, and also exciting for them to have that experience, because college students don't always get a chance to work with the writer in the room. But I spent most of my 20s as a Catholic youth minister, and I'm also queer. And the director of this production, professor there, and is an old college friend of mine, and she reached out to me and asked, would I be interested in writing something for students? And I said, I've never done that before, but sure. And we kind of bounced around and nothing really stuck. And then she asked me at one point, she said, we're really excited to have your queer Catholic energy on this Catholic college campus. And I was like, well, why don't I write about that? I've never really written seriously about kind of the intersection of those two things in my life. And so the play follows a young bisexual college student who goes with a group of his sort of queer student alliance friends from college to a protest who's doing some gross anti-immigrant shit. And he gets interviewed by a journalist covering the protest and asks him some questions. And he says something, as a queer Catholic, I believe it's our highest calling to stand in solidarity with marginalized communities. And it ends up on the page of the paper. And so that's how everybody in his life finds out that he's queer, and it sort of blows up his life with his family. He has their parents are dead, but he has two siblings who are really supportive, and one brother who's kind of homophobic and difficult, blows up his life at his home church, blows up his life on campus. And it's sort of about how he navigates the process of kind of trying to find a place where he can be, where all the sides of himself can kind of, have some wholeness, and it's also, really about all the different aspects of how faith and sexuality can coalesce. There are people who are deeply religious and queer, and those things live in harmony, and they're fine with it. And there are some people who grew up religious and were so wounded by the homophobia they experienced in the church that they could never go back, and that's valid too. And but it's been really cool because the cast is mostly queer young people, and so just like being in that room and those conversations with them and like workshopping a new work, so they get to like weigh in on it. The actors can like ask questions, I don't understand why my character would do that, or can you explain this, and like really like helping to shape it. It was really important to us to like have, queer actors in the room, but it's just been so amazing to be like, I mean, aside from the hiccup of like, it is so difficult to rehearse with masks. Like having to like, the amount you have to project to be able to like be heard, and that you can't like see people's facial expressions. And so like that added sort of an additional like layer of complication. But just being back in a rehearsal room has been so nice. And I've never worked with college students before. And so it's been really cool. So it's at University of Portland. It's just a workshop reading, and it runs just this weekend. So it's October 5th through the 9th. Evenings at 7:30, and then there's a 2 p.m. Sunday show. I don't know what day this is going to go up, but yeah. So then we're hoping that after that, hoping that we can kind of shop it out to get it picked up by other Catholic college campuses where these conversations really aren't even happening yet. But it's been really, really powerful, really emotional. It's asked me to sort of go back to revisit some periods of my life that I don't often revisit, because a lot of it's, very painful, but it's also, I think, been really cathartic and hopeful. I think, there's the language and the conversations that are happening among young people are just very different from like 20 years ago when I was in college, the language that we had on these things. And so I think that's been just really, really cool to see. But so it's been exciting to feel like a playwright again, and to be doing something that really feels like, all the things that I like and miss about being a youth minister without having to be an employee of the archdiocese ever again. Yeah. Things that I miss about being a playwright, just like being in a room with people, making art. So so it's been nice to feel like, sort of that, coming back from the pandemic in a very, like COVID safe way, everyone's masked and stuff, but just to be like in a room again with people, I've been really appreciating. So that's what I'm working on.
Great. Do you think this will play outside of that sort of Catholic environment, like in Portland theaters, or is that something
I hope so.
doing?
I mean, I think the target audience for it in a lot of ways, I think, is going to be Catholic colleges, specifically because I think the hope is that it can really be a sort of spark for conversations that, like, in a more nuanced way that you can do with art that you can't do with like an op-ed in the student paper or like a Twitter thread. Like, it's a more complex version of the conversation, and you can like have a lot of conversations around the play after people have seen it. So I want it to happen in that setting because I think those settings need it. But I would love to see like just a theater company do it. And have it actually, like, because this is just workshops. Like, I would really love to see it fully stage, and there's music in it as well. And we've been the actors are, for the purpose of the reading, sort of singing an a cappella with a pitch pipe, but in a fully staged production, there's like so many cool things that you could do with like how the liturgical music sort of weaves into the play. And so I'd love to see that someday, but at the moment I think where this development process is really to like kind of work out all the last little kinks and come away with a script that feels really like locked and solid and has sort of been through the ringer. And then shopping it out after that and kind of see who takes it.
That's awesome. And you're sort of a lifelong Oregonian, Portlander, and you're just someone who has a lot of great insights about the political climate and the world that we see. When I follow your work on Twitter, when you're not wisely staying away from Twitter sometimes, but you'll often come back and go viral with a comment or something. So could we talk a bit, because I feel like we all personally sort of put in the scope what's happening right now, because there's a very good chance that the next governor is going to be a Republican, Christine Drazan, and and just to sort of take that a step back, I know, and perhaps it's sort of a Portland bubble of sorts, but whenever I would raise this concern, and obviously I do this professionally, but I would raise this concern to Portland neighbors or whatever, there'd be this sort of blank stare, like, what? That's a possibility? Or, I know Betsy Johnson's running, but she's like 3 or 5%, right? And it's like, no. And so could you tell us a bit about Betsy Johnson, how she was a Democrat, what her kind of deal is, your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, I mean, I do not know a ton about her specifically, but I do. I mean, the thing that really alarms me is I feel what I'm hearing, and kind of the angle she appears to be taking in this particular campaign is one that I think is very, very dangerous, which feels like she's kind of running on the both sides are equally as bad platform. It's sort of what it feels like to me. But coming, having been a Democrat, coming from, and Democrat with an elected Democrat that people know, it feels like, if she's going to be sort of pulling votes from either side, she's more likely to be pulling from the left, but her positions are very, like, she's very Republican opinions on things. I mean, just purely in terms of where she's at on guns, it feels like I don't see a lot of daylight between her position on on gun control, gun safety, managing the gun violence crisis that we have in our state, in our country. It feels like she's sort of reciting the talking points that we're used to hearing from Republicans. So it's like, I don't, it and we've talked about this before, like, it does feel like, like, I'm from here. It feels like there was a time in Oregon history where conservative Democrats with guns and more centrist Republicans who would occasionally vote with you on other social things because they didn't really give a shit about abortion or gay marriage that much. There was more fluidity, like there was more of like a center, kind of from both sides. And so 20 years ago, Betsy Johnson might have done just fine, but it feels like, right now, like, she's absolutely not going to generate enough votes to get elected. I think there are enough Republicans who might find her kind of contrarian stance on things appealing, but since she used to be the Democrat, that's off.
Mhm.
And enough Democrats were sort of looking at her going, we have a Democrat running and your positions are antithetical to her, so I don't want. So it's really, it's a. I have complicated feelings about spoiler candidates kind of in general, but I feel like the thrust she seems to be of how the language around her campaign really seems to sort of be like, I'm a third option if you don't like either of these two people. And I think, there's got to be room for us to, like we talked about before, like there's got to be room for us to be able to criticize Democrats. There's got to be room for us to say, like, like the Democratic Party is not perfect and you shouldn't be screamed at for saying that. There shouldn't be like a, like
Mhm.
controversial opinion, like, yes, there are huge problems institutionally on both sides, but they're not at the same scale. And
Absolutely.
so running on a campaign of, I'm who you vote for if you hate both of these people, and sort of like kind of like Jill Steining it a
Yeah.
little bit, where it's like it feels like a stunt.
Mhm.
Um, I don't think that's the
Sure.
solution to how we get a better
Yeah.
Democratic Party.
And
Like,
I don't know. I mean, Stein, was a sort of a different issue.
yeah.
Here, I feel like there is a clear schism in the Democratic Party that's occurring. That
Mhm.
the coalition is much weaker than a
Yeah.
Republican coalition, and you know, um, to use a term I shamelessly stole from you, the discount, the sort of Kirkland brand, Joe Manchin, who was recently defeated. He was an old school Democrat. There's a lot of Joe Manchin, Betsy Johnson Democrats. That was the coalition. And it's something I've actually been, I don't say slapped around about, but I would get lectured about when someone would be like, everyone who voted for Trump in Ohio is a racist and a sexist and a misogynist. It's like, well, some of those guys they had vote like Obama won. Some of these states Obama won. They voted. These are people who voted for Obama, these white guys, whatever. And whatever the shift has happened, there were within our lifetimes, but like, your parents'
Mhm.
generation, your uncles, whatever, these are old. And I would use examples of someone I knew in Washington was very classic, sort of old school Democrat, but sort of like a Bill Maher sense, had a resentment
Mhm. Right.
toward
Right.
what was viewed as the nanny state, what essentially we would say is misogyny, but was part of the coalition, would have been a character on the West Wing
Right.
in the
Right.
world
Right.
where white cis men lectured to adoring women who like, you're so smart and white, right? And that was the sort of structure. And now it's splitting. And now it's like this isn't and I do think with what's happening with Kotek, Bessie Johnson specifically loathed Kotek, loathed Brown, Kate Brown, the governor. And I think you can't, if you look at the history, Kate Brown and Tina Kotek are somewhat outliers compared to the Democrats who have won previously. And I feel like this is where we're getting that sort of schism, because it was always about the coalition. And it was something that's interesting that I saw online, I think, that speaks to this and speaks to what Johnson's doing, which is, I think, less chaotic in a way and more deliberate than what Stein might have done. Was someone was just like, look, I don't, I want these young people or these liberals, basically like you, who's, we're in our 40s, but they tend to lecture down to us, whatever. Just shut up, vote, vote. We need these moderates to win, and our ideal candidate, describing sort of a Joe Biden or Amy Klobuchar or a Pete Buttigieg, and then we can never, but obviously we can't have some crazy radical liberal, running. So this idea essentially of how this works is that God forbid you ever nominate a Tina Kotek. God forbid you nominate.
Right.
Obviously, we need your votes. We knew you were part of this coalition. You show up, you canvass, you vote. We want you there, Claire. But oh my God, the queer liberal, you can't head our party, because
Right.
then we'll chase away those people. Your place is here. under, subordinate to the folks in charge, the elders. And I think going back to when a very annoying Twitter thread where we were being lectured about our elder gaze and sort of
right. Oh my God, yeah.
reinforcing of a social hierarchy, which to me is inherently conservative. So of course that is within the party of like, no, I often jokingly referred to Hakeem Jeffries, the guy in waiting, as the Prince Charles of the Democratic Party. And now King Charles is laughing. It's like, oh, look, eventually Nancy's not going anywhere.
Oh,
I'm the king. You're still, and you'll never, and the house is going to flip, and you'll probably never be speaker. You'll be like,
God,
you'll be as old as I am at best. But there's a sense of this is sort of the hierarchy, which we're not seeing in the Republican Party. And the Republican Party is a very youth-driven, grassroots energy that has sort of taken over, toppled that hierarchy. And I think that's what we're seeing because, for Johnson and I think Schrader had endorsed her as well. The idea is that yes, both sides are both extremes. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who literally wants to, set buildings on fire and have another civil war, and the queer lady who wants, universal health care. They're just as extreme,
right?
And if Kotek loses, what's going to happen is it won't be like with Jill Stein, where you can't go. No Democrat will let you forget Ralph Nader or Jill Stein. But if Drazan wins, it won't be, oh, Betsy Johnson and every centrist is responsible for this. It is Tina Kotek.
Right. It'll be Tina Kotek wasn't electable. Yeah.
And Kate Brown's wokeism and all that she did, and there were homeless people, and she closed down schools, and and that will be the reshuffling of the social order. Republic, this is deliberately, to me, seems like we are reasserting this social order, this hierarchy of power in the Democratic Party, even in Oregon. And it'll of course be, if a Republican wins Oregon, that will be sort of the ripple effect across.
Right. Well, everywhere. Right. Yeah. Well, and I think the thing that makes it so dangerous is that I think, the Republican, like Oregon Republicans are like, it is unusual to see them this sort of in lockstep with the messaging, like I'm used to, and maybe you are too, like my growing up, like my conception of like what an Oregon Republican looked like it was much more fractured, like there were the, rich white suburbanite Republicans, but there were also a lot of people who were sort of like identified as Republican, but sort of more libertarian, and Oregon is the least churched state in the country. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't really a kind of evangelical morality driven conservatism. It was a lot more like business and class focused, and on racism focused, just because of Oregon's history. But so there were particular issues where it was just like I don't really remember abortion ever being a particularly ring the bell and everybody lines up to yell about it kind of issue on the right here. I do remember anti-gay legislation popping up periodically, over the last 20, 30 years, like that I remember. And but I feel like the shift in like the post-Trump era has made every Republican is now a Trump Republican. Oh, yeah. Like the talking points are coming from Fox News and everyone's repeating them. And so, when I was reading the voter guidebook, when it, and sort of reading about Christine Drazan, but also all of the other sort of, Republican gubernatorial forerunners, and you're just like, none of this has anything to do with Oregon at all. This is just like, everyone is just, top to bottom, everyone in the whole country and on the right, they're all on the same message. It's all, our schools are too woke, and it's all COVID stuff too. Part of me wonders, like, not just the Trump of it all, but where we'd be in this electoral cycle without the pandemic, because it really does feel like the thing that sharpened the Kate Brown backlash really was that violent resistance to mask mandates, you know, and like that brought out a new level of ugly, polarizing, like just this rift in the discourse where it was sort of like, you know, somebody who might have voted for, you know, a Democrat in the past, or where there might have been like, no, I'm a Republican, but my neighbor's Democrat, but we get along, whatever. Like, it's like all of that's gone.
Oh, yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's impossible to overstate the impact that the masks had on that. And that, because I don't remember it, like, when she was elected Secretary of State, I truly don't remember Kate Brown's bisexuality being weaponized against her to a degree that really registered. Like, I think people kind of knew, but I don't remember seeing it being like a smear. And now it feels like we're in a place where Tina Kotek's queerness is being weaponized in a way that and I think it's because like everything is sort of, it's like she's Kate Brown but more. Kate Brown was bisexual. Tina Kotek's a lesbian, you know, so it's like everything that she was, it's like dialed up one now.
Well, the
and that's
queerness
kind of how it's being framed.
the queerness has much been more weaponized, I think, nationally. And I think a lot of
The
Democrats
whole
are like,
discourse has
oh,
shifted.
Republicans, they're just beating up on trans people. And it's like, no, they never just beat up on trans. They're going to keep escalating. And so it became like they're, you know, sort of like how globalism became code for, you know, I don't want to say I hate Jews, I use globalists. So like groomer and indoctrination and wokeism became this catch-all for weaponizing queerness and to weaponize. So Tina Kotek presents in a certain way that is, and hard to like, how someone presents is often hard to say, well, it's not that I don't like her because she's queer, it's just this. It's like, and so that becomes harder to narrow down. I think something I had noticed, what you were saying about it is such a moral, this election will have a very sort of, to me, kind of moral referendum, especially about the pandemic, about, you know, law enforcement and so forth, because after 2020, essentially DeSantis is potentially going to glide his way into re-election despite fighting, you know, essentially the mandates, fighting, you know, being a sort of a overt culture warrior. And anyone who tried to follow sort of science or to sort of let's not let people die, there's tremendous backlash. And, you know, to borrow from Winston Churchill, you can always rely on Democrats to do the right thing after exhausting every other option. Here, it's like the next time there's a pandemic, no one is going to shut anything down because there's no reward. Like it's like, well, look, all these people died in Florida. Look, there's some numbers and data. It's like freedom, no masks. It's like, well, no one cared. Like it just didn't have that impact. And here, as you said, that if you shut down schools, Drazan's weaponizing that. And it's sinister to me because I think, and we could talk about specific policies, specific ways things were managed, but big picture, if Drazan had been governor, if Johnson had been governor in 2020, they would have shut down business. They would have shut down school. Like everyone was doing it.
You had to. Yeah.
Trump was sort of doing it. I mean, it lasted a few weeks. You know, then it's like, oh, it's been 3 weeks. I'm bored of the pandemic.
Everyone's over it. Yeah. Well, I mean, my philosophy with Trump was jealous of the pandemic because it was getting headlines that weren't about him. It was literally like anything that people are paying attention to that's not me, I hate. But I mean, but a normal Republican, right? If it was President Jeb Bush, he would have done all the exact same things. You know, it's like some of these are just the things that you do when there's a public health crisis. But it got politicized so quickly in the gross Republican way of like accusing the left of politicizing it, when it's just like, we're just trying to keep people from dying. You're the ones that are making it into like, you're the ones running on it. You know, even after the mask mandates have been lifted, you're still running on how bad mask mandates were. So like, we didn't politicize this shit, you know, but it feels like a quote unquote normal, like a 30 years ago Republican, you wouldn't really see a lot of distinction between like how Biden is handling things and how they would have done it. Like, I think President Jeb Bush and President Biden would have been pretty close on some of this stuff because a lot of it is just based on just like common wisdom of how we handle pandemics, and also just the fact that we were in an unprecedented situation that like everybody, whoever it was, would have been flying blind a little bit.
Oh yeah, but not basically the idea of just not doing the bare minimum, resisting the backlash, the lawlessness that Republicans then embrace while accusing liberals of lawlessness. Ted Cruz would then go, they would hit the governor, like bail the lady who violated a stay-at-home order. He would go to the salon, even though it's like it's spreading COVID everywhere. This is like April or whatever. They were very clearly already at that point jumping in on the bandwagon, often because there's no bottom with a certain segment, in a significant enough segment that, well, there's just no bottom. There's no need to be reasonable. And I think what is dangerous is that the Democrats have not effectively, sort of, even in states like Oregon, weaponized the fact that all Republicans are this way. And because there's certain classist issues, so Drazan does not present like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert. And so they still think that she's like, oh, she's like my aunt, the small C conservative.
Exactly. I think that's what's so dangerous, because she feels very accessible. She's really charismatic. She feels like a mom of a kid at your kid's school, or a nice lady from church, or your aunt. Like she has a very kind of like very calculated sort of performative warmth in her presentation that makes the terrifying things that she's saying seem like very reasonable things that your nice aunt would say, and so they go down much easier, especially with other white women.
Yeah. And I think she will probably win white women, certainly.
I think she absolutely will win white women.
Because the fear of
conservative white women don't like lesbians. I mean, that like there are a lot of even who define themselves as more centrist or more progressive, straight white women of all generations who maybe like gay men but don't like lesbians. There's sort of a fundamental attack on your definition of what a woman is when a woman looks like Tina Kotek, and they won't be able to articulate it, and it won't feel like homophobia. It won't feel like I don't have a problem with gay people. It comes from a deep like internalized misogyny, what women are supposed to be.
Absolutely. And
those women are all going to vote for Drazan.
And you're no fun, Claire. I mean,
exactly.
You refuse to be my Rupert Everett. You refuse.
Right. Yes. Exactly.
You're not my Stanford
We're
Blanche.
not Will and Grace. Exactly.
You're not my Stanford Blanche. You're just a person.
Yeah. And a person
you might not
who
even want to go to brunch with me. Like,
right. Like gay men are fun. Lesbians are buzzkills. That's kind of the vibe. Yeah. Which, I mean,
there was like so many TV shows that were, that's the like, even me, not a very particular woke person, was like, wow, this seems to be pretty clearly about lesbians are drab and unfun and not. And even if you take those things and say, well, even as a straight person, drab and unfun usually loses to warm PTA mom. So if those things are what's presenting, and I'm reading that, and it's not like I don't have to know that Tina Kotek is gay. It's just that I have been conditioned from TV and from media, and just the hair, the dress, the things, how they communicate is just registering to me. I don't even think it's anything. It's like, oh, well, this lady seems like she's nice, and she's gonna have a homeless emergency rule. So, and when Republicans, I mean, what do you think this homeless emergency that Christine Drazan will put into place? How do you think that will shake out?
I mean, the housing situation I'm in Portland. I know it's bad statewide, but just sort of from what I see here, it is so, I mean, on the one hand, like, I'm glad, like, I'm not running for governor because, like, I don't have an easy solution to this either. Like, it is complicated, and if there was an easy fix, we would have done it 20 years ago, right? So, like, I understand that, but the way we criminalize houselessness in this country, the way we just assume if you are a person who lives on the streets that you must be a bad, gross, evil person. The danger with it is, like, that's such a satisfying narrative of superiority for people to believe, and that's what Republicans weaponize. So it's
Yeah.
and which is, and what's upsetting to me, speaking as a Christian, is how often it is like there's like a Christian morality lens to it, when in fact this is one of the areas in which the Christian Bible is extremely specific about what the fuck you're supposed to do when somebody doesn't have anything to eat or anywhere to live.
Mm.
And so this weird sort of reversal, like I'm reinforced in like my, white supremacist Christian upper middle class, superiority as a person, because it's like, well, I'm better off than you. But I don't want to like look at you or think about you, or or have to acknowledge that maybe the comforts that I have were obtained at your expense or luck and not merit, and that anybody at any point in this fucking country could end up hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical debt and end up losing their house. That's just the world that we live in, and so this grafting of a kind of sense of superiority onto like, looking around you and being like, oh, okay, well, those people are like bad and dirty and gross, get rid of them, because it's sort of, it's like polluting the business, district or whatever. It really feels like we are treating homeless, like human beings without a home are being treated like literally the way we treat trash on public streets. It's a thing that we need to clean up, so for the sake of business owners. So like the primary stakeholders in our conversation about homelessness are like the Downtown Portland Business Alliance. And nobody on the right seems to think that that is a chilling and dystopian way to
Not
approach
many
it.
people on the left. I mean, homeless people aren't a very significant voting bloc, and nor do they have much power. And Robin Panacchia, who I co-host the chat with, we've discussed this. Just their states, like Arizona, for instance, their entire economy is rooted in profiting off taking people, housing them, feeding them indefinitely. Like, it makes money. It's not just crazy social, it makes money. And somehow that is only acceptable if we deem them criminals, and we sort of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, understand it's going to be miserable for them there. And it's like Shawshank Redemption, but not we won't say, well, the same concept could be done. Like I said, of wardens, you have like social workers or whatever, and here's other places, but we can house them. I certainly agree the current system is unsustainable. And I think what's happened is our wonderful mayor, I'm not a big fan of him, who did not, this is often the case in all these issues. Again, Tina Kotek, Kate Brown, it'll be as if the narrative again, and I see this a lot when you talk about Portland, the stuff in the streets and homelessness, and this is again something that Democrats were sort of, I would see Democrats rolling their eyes. Well, they talk about Portland on Fox News day after day, and it's like, and it paid off.
Right.
The governor's going to be it. Oregonians watch Fox News, and
they think this state's flippable now because of that.
And but Adams was not some crazy liberal. I mean, a lot of never Trumpers,
not at all.
A lot of never Trump, they're acting as if Sarah Oney had won, and so many never Trumpers were applauding us. I remember reading at the Bulwark and other non-Trump but conservative publications of like, oh well, Democrats rejected their crazy candidate, but like unfortunately Republicans are embracing their crazy candidate. It's like, well, and unfortunately voters did not give us any gold stars for that, because Carrie Lake could be governor of Arizona. There's also the crazies who could actually win. Their party rallies behind them, and we just say, here's our most corporate, for one of the most liberal cities in the world, here's our corporate Democrat, and he, this is what he does. This is a solution, but that's still no. It's all crazy wokeism, and we're gonna have to bring a Republican in, who probably went to the same MBA course. This is and that, and it just, that's what's sort of frustrating to me, because it's not like sort of crazy liberalism has failed because he's the guy in charge, but that's the perception. And if you don't do anything, you're going to bring in someone. I mean, very clear what she will do. She will, there will use terms like sweeps. If you know anyone in law enforcement, they call them sweeps. They'll sweep those folks in. It will be hardcore. And having lived in New York to the Giuliani era, your Park Avenue liberals, but even some of your non-Park Avenue liberals will be at cocktail parties winking. It's like, well, it's so safer now. It's so nicer now. Maybe, I like her. And then, glide path to re-election, and who knows, beyond, as a national figure, because the idea of, no one loves anything more than cleaning up the perception of cleaning up crime and
Right, exactly. If you make it
social,
about crime, then you can then both sides will praise you for getting homeless people off the streets, because everybody wants there to be less crime, and no one is stopping to think about the fact that being homeless is not a crime, it's a life circumstance. But if you reframe it as that, then everybody will support you. I mean, yeah, because the Democrats like the sweeps too, like Ted Wheeler is as much in the pocket of the Business Alliance as anybody else. And they have centered homelessness in Portland as an issue that is affecting the bottom line of businesses. And both the left and the right are united in that language. Everyone talks about it now the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I think Wheeler's policies have not necessarily produced anything that has been, well, he's presented as being sort of some crazy woke man, but that's not what's happening.
It's a I mean, it must be wild to be him, where it's like people from both sides hate you for totally opposite, non-compatible reasons. Yeah, because like the right perceives him as like that it's his fault that he like allowed these protests to happen, and like, oh, Portland needs a better mayor because leftist, Antifa Ted Wheeler letting all the, and everyone on the actual left is like, Ted Wheeler is the one whose cops are out there tear gassing people. Like, Ted Wheeler's not on our side, but
well,
but
yeah, you're either willingly letting this happen, or you're
too weak.
or you're
Yeah.
too weak. So either is not particularly viewed as good. You're too weak to manage this. And I sort of, so this backlash has been, I don't obviously know how this will turn out, but just cynically speaking, there's usually only one outcome to a backlash brewing that I've been seeing brewing without any sort of counter messaging, any counter response from Democrats. How did this happen? How did we have in the schism? What do you think? Was it just sort of like complete cluelessness that would happen, or that Johnson would essentially be part of a formulated revolt? I mean, has to be formulated. She has support from a lot of folks who want to take down Kotek.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways it's like a distilled version of, we were having the same conversation in the presidential primary when everybody was trying to say, like, don't vote for Warren or Castro or anyone else like that because they're not electable. We need to all throw our support behind Biden because he's electable. And it's like, we've somehow just agreed on both sides that electable just means the most conservative person in either party. So the most conservative Republican is always going to win because that's who their fringe, like that's who their base is. And the most conservative Democrat is always going to be painted as the safest bet because we're sort of fundamentally, I think, 30 years behind. And when we talk about who we think our base is. And so there's a sort of myth that, that what Republicans want, or that what Democrats want, is like bipartisanship and and civility and to be the bigger person, and we need somebody who can win coal miners in Virginia, and we need somebody who can win your grandma, and but also has credibility with Black voters, but older Black voters vote differently than younger Black voters. Like all this sort of like framing it as like the most conservative people on the Democratic side are the ones that we need to work the hardest to pull in, which hasn't been true, I think, in a very long time. I think, like mobilizing, like being for something instead of just being against what the other guys are for is like, it's like two different
Absolutely.
of language. And I think the reason that like Warren was so popular and, and Castro and a lot of the other, people in the primary was because it was like, now this campaign is about something. Like now we're not just trying to stop Trump. It's just like, oh, she's telling me the things that she wants to do. And I think that idea that you have to, that anyone who is on the progressive side is fundamentally dangerous, because it is more important that they not scare off
Absolutely.
the center than to bring in the frustrated, disaffected left.
And
The math, and I just don't think that math works anymore.
yeah. Well, and there were, even when the electability argument was being defeated, like Biden was having trouble with Hispanic voters. I was calling this out early on.
Yeah.
In Nevada, because Sanders did far better with working class Hispanics, and it was like, it won't. Obviously, he will do as well. Sort of like, that's kind of insulting. He's not. How do you assume? And he didn't. There were like border towns in Texas where Hispanic voters, he underperformed Hillary and Obama, and I think, to your point, you were saying that I would actually add to was, I think it's not so much about the most conservative. It is about, because what does conservatism mean? And we were talking about Republicans. There's just like overt extremism, it's like an insurgency of anti-democracy. It seems to me that what they're embracing is like, Trump brought out a lot of irregular voters who are like, if we don't get our guy, we're walking.
Right.
And no matter how many Republicans protested, and it's like, oh, he's he's crazy and he's unfit, they eventually folded. And so what's been revealed, and it happened again. So Carrie Lake, we all know Carrie Lake, who ran in Arizona. She was already saying that the election was going to be rigged. If the mainstream Republican had won, she would have spent the whole time tanking her. She would not have endorsed her. And when she won, everyone who was saying, well, she lies about the election, she lies about this, she's unfit, was suddenly like, okay, well, she's better than a Democrat. So Doug Ducey, whatever. So what's been proven is the establishment, Republican establishment, the electable candidate is the extreme. So when everyone says, oh, well, Marcia Green couldn't win, no, because if she gets for a primary, and she will, if she got through a primary, they're going to then say, okay, well, she's better than Harris, she's better than, and the establishment will come to her. Well, what we've seen is that Democrats tend to take the view that we'll just yell and lecture. Like, we will still condemn every Nader voter and every Stein voter and young person. And it's like, how dare you not feel inspired? You're insulting the spirit of Rosa Parks and all that. And that, because negging is a political strategy, apparently. Like, breaking down someone, that's going to get them to come out and stand in line for 12 hours to vote for you when you tell them they suck if they don't. And that's been the strategy. Like, you need to come out, because here's how these people will hurt you if you don't, even though I'm not really helping you right now, but it'll get worse. That's not working, but that lecturing is supposed to work. So that's all these folks will come in, as opposed to, well, if you follow the Republican pattern, it's really not about the most conservative. It was like, here's the one who excites, as Trump did, excites the base the most. And then the rest, he got every vote Romney got, because everyone at the country club still voted for him for the tax cuts and everything. But he also brought in some Obama voters, whatever, white guys in the Midwest. And that is how you win elections. Democrats still are sort of the idea of like, here's our guy who's more acceptable to the country club, even though they won't vote for him because he's a Democrat. But and now we're going to go and, oh, well, it's like, it's mid-October. Let's go to a black church. And let's maybe put someone on a date. What do the young people watch today? I mean, everyone in this room is 80, but how do we connect with young people? And that's just not us. And when we've seen the pattern, when the perceived liberal even follows the rules and wins, we will tank them. So what's happening here against Kotek, or instead of everyone saying, look, Betsy Johnson said, yeah, I have my issues with her. Obviously, she's better than a Republican because I'm awake. I've seen what's happening. When I will stand behind her, I will exact some sort of political concession from her, but I'm not going to tank her. But they're going to tank her. And it's infuriating to me, because of all times to do this with after Roe, with abortion
I
rights
know.
being at stake,
Yeah.
and the message it sends of, you know, the fuel of the steam to have an Oregon governor at the Republican National Convention in 2024 introducing Donald Trump is sort of how do you get your base excited? It feels like, oh, we've already lost.
Well, and I know I feel so frustrated because it's like, you know, like what we've learned over the past, well, I mean, our lifetimes, but it has become even more amplified in the past few years, is that like state level protections are the only sort of bulwark between us and the shit coming down from the Supreme Court. You know, like the stakes have never been higher for state legislatures, for governors, for, you know, for all of the, you know, the ability to at least like in your small bubble protect the people in your community from the, you know, continual erosion of our federal level protections. And so it is like the most terrifying time possible to be trying to figure out what, you know, Governor Christine Drazan is going to do with our fucking healthcare. And but I think, you know, I do, like you were saying, you know, I think it's this idea that, um, you know, if you have like a conservative, more sort of centrist Democrat candidate and a more leftist candidate, right, and they have their own voter blocks, so it's like they're different. So whichever one ends up getting elected, somebody's party, either the A group or the B group, is going to have to compromise something. And my frustration is it is always the left that is asked to compromise. It's never the center that's asked to be like, okay, well, so like, you know, they're like Sanders versus Biden, for example. You know, if it had kind of come down to that, and it's just like the expectation would always be that the Sanders, you know, cohort would be expected to put their desires and preferences, legislation that they wanted, their values on the shelf to vote for Biden. And it is never the Biden voters who are asked to sort of put their stuff on the shelf or compromise or think differently in order to move to the left, the way the right is just moving further and further and further to the right. It's just like we are continually asking the people who are like who are thinking in a broader, more progressive way, like, yeah, we'll get
Mhm.
to that if we get to it. But the most important thing is, you know, is the math, is the numbers. We can't lose the White House. We can't lose
Yeah.
the House. We can't lose Senate. And I
Well,
get that. And I also care about the
yeah.
math, but I also care about us doing
Well,
things.
the left just keeps getting scapegoated. I think you've noticed this online where during the
Right. Yeah.
Build Back Better, it was just like, well, how could you know, it's the progressives threatening to tank the bipartisan thing by insisting on their crazy leftist Build Back Better. And it's like, no, this is Biden's.
Right.
They're actually
Yeah.
the ones trying to get the
Yeah.
president's agenda passed. It's the
Right.
centrists who are tanking what they endorsed the guy who said, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And then when he gets elected, they're like, no, you can't do X, Y, and Z. Whereas
But
the progressives are like, we're not
he
crazy
was
about him,
right.
but let's do it.
But he was going to do the right thing. Yeah. I mean, like there have been actually many opportunities for like where it feels like Biden is putting forth something where it's like, even if it's not 100%, it's sort of like, okay, I feel you listening. You know, like you took a call from Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren on this, you know, like, or you're reading the math correctly. And, you know, and we were frustrated that you weren't doing this and now you're doing it. Great. And it's the other voters in the Democratic Party who we sort of think of as being kind of the Biden contingent, who are like scared he's going to stick his neck out too far. So it's like, I guess then what you really want is for us to just do nothing, because anything we do is too risky, and you don't
Mhm.
see that nothing is a bigger risk,
Oh yeah, but I
you
mean,
know?
Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg. I'm not talking about Castro or Warren here, but
Yeah.
if you look at their campaign websites during during the primaries, they were promoting stuff that would be viewed as overt now crazy progressive stuff. And so that's what kind of feels like the scapegoating, because it's not
Right.
like AOC is pitched a fit, or Liz Warren. Liz Warren never, because you know she has the same vote in the Senate as Cinema
Mhm.
or or Manchin, and so she or Sanders never said, okay, well, unless there's a wealth tax in this, you don't get my vote.
Right.
Whereas, cinema somehow is allowed in the media universe, is allowed to say, unless it's exactly what I want, I'm going to tank it. And Warren doesn't do. Warren's not like, no, unless there's a screw the rich tax in this, I'm not voting for it. You're not getting this. No one, everyone assumes her vote is in the tank. Same with Sanders, and so then they kind of go to her, to cinema, as if she has some sort of extra special key vote. It's just more of like, I don't care if the party. Um, just to talk about her. What is going on when in Arizona they pass a anti-abortion law that has been existing since before it was even a state. Civil. That's how terrible it is. It's like that. And that next day, the supposed Democratic pro-choice senator is in Kentucky talking about how great Mitch McConnell is.
I know.
I don't, what the timing of this and whatever, like, and all she had posted was some sort of boilerplate, like, abortion should be legal thing. Well, it should.
Right. And you could help with that if you did your fucking
and then
job.
she was just like, well, no, I will never get rid of the 60 vote threshold. And then McConnell pats her on the back. And it's like, well, you understand that, Miss Uber filibuster, that the so-called moderates like Collins, Murkowski, even Jeff Flake, who you replaced, voted to get rid of the Supreme Court filibuster, which is how you even have Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. So like, it's just absurd. You look like an idiot when you're there with a guy.
She's conceding McConnell's point that the filibuster is good when it helps Mitch McConnell and bad when it hurts Mitch McConnell. And so to hear Kristen Sinema be like, yeah, that's what I think too. You're just like, motherfucker. Like, it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating because it feels like I feel like she's just, at this point, she's just trolling. Like, it feels like theater. It doesn't feel like she has done any of the bare minimum homework to be even baseline competent at her job. And she's just shilling for the Fox News talking head pundit gig she's going to get when she can't get reelected. It's just is maddening.
Well, yeah, well, as anyone who has children knows, giving them, sometimes it's not good to give them everything they want, because the best thing voters love when you talk to them as if they're children.
Right.
Even though Republicans have been like, everything they've done has been, like broke, like a child having a tantrum over losing a game. It's like this, well, it was rigged, it was fixed. It was like they're, 6 years old, a very poor behaved 6-year-old. And Republicans passed party line votes at the state level. So if she's just going to encourage Calvin Ball and give the switch, which is just like, yes, well, even though Republicans are passing laws stripping my constituents of their voting rights and their abortion rights on a party line basis, a bare majority, I will not support, for reasons, a federal response to that because of the filibuster. It makes no sense unless, so to me, it's like, I would always much rather, we talk about both sides, but to me, it's like, look, Marjorie Green, her platform is, I hate you and want to hurt you. All right, got it. But not like, I'm on your side, Stephen and Claire, but not enough to do anything. Filibuster's too important.
It's so interesting because it's like, I feel like over the past few years, really, like, since the rise of Trump, on the right, the figures the right really unifies around. The thing that's so wild about it is that they're all people who are sort of fundamentally out for themselves, and they're not really advocating on behalf of the party. Like, Trump just did shit because he felt like it, and then the party was like, oh, okay, and then they followed. But he had no interest in, and was in fact often markedly antagonistic towards, the rest of the party, other Republicans. And so the Trumpists who kind of follow him, your DeSantis's and Boebert and Green and Holly, they rise to fame on the same level of like just chaotic self-absorption and being like, I'm out for number one because I want headlines. But somehow the party coalesces around that. And so it is totally unified, even though you're following somebody who doesn't give a shit about you. Meanwhile, over here on the left, everyone is trying so hard to come up with a compromise that won't make anybody mad. And then you have Sinema and Manchin who are playing the Republican playbook, and everyone is like looking at them like, what the fuck are you doing? Because over here we're trying to shave off every last little sharp edge of this legislation so that it won't make anybody grumpy. And like, and she's just stunting. I mean, she's truly in some ways the ideological heir to Trump, in my opinion, purely just based on like I am fully out for my own personal agenda, and I don't perceive the rest of my team or being part of a team or working with anybody else as providing me any benefit, because I just spotlight on me, you know.
I think the reason she is so unsuccessful is that she's in this sort of MSNBC bubble where there's praise for how she behaves. Like, we probably love her on Morning Joe or something like that. Whereas Trump, in his worst ways, certain things he would do would resonate with the average person. So average is, the conventional wisdom is, oh, how dare you be mean to John McCain? He's like, well, the MFer blew up my legislation, so that I wanted to get rid of the, of course I'm angry with him. You'd be angry if somebody did that to you. And I'm like, yeah, I guess I would be. It's like Mitch McConnell, I'm gonna have this really awful screed, insult his wife because I don't like the guy. And I was like, yeah, I don't really like Mitch McConnell either. Like, why is Biden, like, no one, it's this idea that like behaving like a superhero somehow gives you like being above the fray. So, Biden going on Jimmy Kimmel or other things talking about how Mitch McConnell's a good guy and I get along with him just sounds like a chump, because Mitch McConnell is kicking our asses. And so, Trump, the fact that Trump could do that, and of course someone's going to come down on Trump, same way of like, well, yes, you should call out the fact daily, the president should be, there are women dying right now because these two assholes won't, and Trump would do this if something similar, right? Mm-hmm. These two assholes are putting up some sort of rule, like, it doesn't make any sense. She's saying that we're acting like spoiled children, but these are literal children who are pregnant who are dying because of this. And instead it's like, okay, well, maybe if I get 2 more senators, maybe we'll get something. And so I think coming down, there's this idea that, and a lot of the centrists, and there's centrists everywhere, I see them online, they show up at Wonkette as well, of like, well, praising Republicans is what you have to do. That's how you speak. That's, Pelosi needs to do it. That's just how you get things done. But like, what have you achieved by complimenting Mitch McConnell?
What's it getting done? Is it getting the Republicans to compromise and agree with us? No. Are they even being baseline civil to us? No. They're doing exactly what they were doing before. All you're doing is like you're caving in to them in the name of compromise, but compromise sounds a lot like just letting the Republicans have whatever they want and not fighting them.
If I would have French kissed Mitch McConnell if that meant that, like, oh, right, it's right. It's kind of mean to replace RBG so close to the election. Oh, okay. Like, fine. That's a sacrifice I'm willing to make, but it's not. He just laughs at you. So, like, why would I just say
we all knew he was going to do that.
Well, they actually thought it was a sort of a rule. And I remember Cory Booker was like, but there's this promise. It was whatever. And it was like, as Lorraine Hansberry said, in Raisin in the Sun, when a man takes off with your money, he doesn't leave any road maps. He's not. God,
sometimes I think Cory Booker is a little too pure. I'm like, oh, sweetie, bless your heart. No,
it's like,
I could have told you how this was going to work out.
And before we leave, perspective of your time, but I'd read all of it going on to Supreme Court. There was some article from Nina Totenberg, who was a friend of the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and just the last year of her life, literally hanging on in death and pain, close to death, in awful pain, holding on, and it's horrible. And I'm sure Republicans, Democrats would say the same thing if it had been like a skeletal Clarence Thomas trying to cling to life until another. It just seems like what's unfortunate is that I think to her death, though, Ginsburg would have still sort of defended the institution of the Supreme Court as somehow not political, not whatever. And I'm like, you are not at home in bed with your children for your final. I appreciate what you were doing, but what you were doing, that sacrifice to me indicates that this is all
that
political.
Yeah.
That lives depend on when people are appointed and who appoints them. And there's no sort of
It's
uber.
not neutral. If it was neutral, she'd be allowed to just retire and and live out her last few days in peace and a few years in peace and not have to be going to work when she was struggling with a terminal illness. But I think that she did, she was friends with Scalia. I obviously I love and revere Ginsburg as much as anybody else does. I think she was an incredible historic figure with a tremendous legacy. But I do think that she was not a leftist. She was not a progressive in her values in the way that we often politically define progressivism, because she was fundamentally an institutionalist in some ways that you can't escape. That she was able to be friends with Scalia because in that little bubble, when you're on the Supreme Court together, she and Scalia were peers who had more in common with each other than not. And that is not true for those of us down on the ground.
No.
We're not able to your fire breathing conservative polemicness is just your day job. But after 5 p.m., we all clock out and go get drinks together. That's not how it is for those of us who are affected by those decisions. So when you live in that sort of rarefied privileged bubble, it is hard to maintain a real perspective of what it's like for the rest of us down on the ground, I feel because you are there to protect the institution.
Yeah, and I think the way that Green and others, and she's sort of inspired that and taken that baton from Trump, but these are our enemies and they're our enemies. Marco Rubio's adapted it. Marco Rubio was originally supposed to be the right-wing Obama, right? All optimism, whatever. Nope, all Trumpism now. Because part of it is just sort of, well, for the average person, if you're not in those cocktail parties, it is very personal. And I think they've gotten that. It's for these people, it's very personal. And obviously it's personal in ways that I don't think should be. I don't think that queer people existing is going to make your life demonstrably worse. But whatever, but for them, it's these rulings, these laws, these things are personal, and these are your enemies, and they are running on it. And I think because unfortunately Democrats are still very much about institutionalisms and whatever, that's made it hard for us to sort of declare that type of war. And to bring this back to Oregon, I think Drazan, who's been on Fox News, if you're on Laura Ingraham, and can you imagine that? Can you imagine what the conventional wisdom would be if a Democrat trying to win in a traditionally red state was on, I can't even, Rachel Maddow's not really equal to Laura Ingraham. I can't imagine.
We don't really have a leftist
on essentially and overtly, because he's overtly racist, overtly terrible, but on sort of just crazy socialist Castro theater every night. This candidate is yes, and now please elect me governor of West Virginia. Would be absurd.
Everybody, what the fuck are you doing? Yeah.
So I think Drazan is going to run like DeSantis. That's a playbook. That's how you become potentially a 2024 contender or beyond, and or vice presidential contender. And it's scary. I don't, for anyone who's Oregonian who's not considering either voting or think, you've got to. We make it as easy as we can. I don't know.
Yeah, I really do.
Do you believe that Johnson voters are reachable? They're probably not watching this, but do you think they're reachable and understanding of to the extent that you are worried about certain things, Drazan's going to make them worse? Or is it a case of they're prioritizing sweeping those streets?
It's hard to know. I would I think the answer may be some yes and some no, and it really varies on sort of which of the two kind of motivations are driving their support for Johnson. I think the people who are movable are the ones who are like, I am fundamentally a Democrat, but there are problems that I have with Tina Kotek, either as a person or what she represents, or my perception of her policies, of the kind of governor I think that she will be. I think some of those people, I think there are conversations to be had with those people. If you're like, I'm a lifelong Democrat, I'm not a Republican, I just don't like this one lady, I think there is sometimes wiggle room on that. I think the people who are not reachable are the ones who have bought into this idea of not just that like both sides have problems, which we all agree that they do, but that they have equivalent problems, and that therefore the solution is to vote for somebody who is neither, in a way that's sort of more, because that, like, a lot of that is sort of performative. I think people who are reachable, I think the Johnson voters that are reachable are the ones who are like I genuinely believe that this person would be a better governor, and that's how I'm making my decision. Okay, that's a conversation. Like, what is it? What are her policies that you agree with? What are the things that Kotek's doing that you don't agree with? Is there middle ground? Maybe there's things that you don't know. Maybe there are like, like maybe there's wiggle room there. But if it's just like, I just don't like them, like I don't want to vote for Democrat or Republican because they're both bad, so I want the feeling of having voted for somebody who isn't that, then it's sort of like, I don't know that people are reachable. But I think if you're looking at it in terms of, if you're comparing them based on the issues and you have chosen one over the other, it's like, I disagree with you, but I can respect that because it's based on the issues. I don't think that, I don't, part of it, I think the complication is just like, who's even voting based on the issues anymore? Like a lot of Oregon Republicans are just going to be like, who's the Republican? Great.
Yeah.
Have they compared her policies even to Johnson's to see? No, because it's like, we want a Republican governor. We don't care who it is.
Johnson is only costing Drazan. Drazan could win by underperforming most recent Republican candidates by about 8 points or so, or 6 points, according to the polls. And whereas Kotek is underperforming Brown's past two performances by like 18, almost 20 points in some polls. So that's a considerable
and I
amount.
think Betsy's going to pull from the left, I think. Yeah.
Who have been voting for Democrats. Like anyone's going to vote for Republicans. So maybe there's some libertarian types who are whatever, but most of these are Democrats. So that kind of goes back to, there's this, like, we've been bleeding these Democrats since Obama. I mean, we have to say this, it's about that social order. Like, well, I'm a Democrat, but I kind of want sort of a benevolent white Christian supremacy that's running things, and we're going to be sort of kind to minorities, but ultimately the top of the party is led by white guys. And as soon as you flip that, so when John Kennedy in Louisiana, the senator who was on Fox News, it's like overtly repulsive and disgusting, but he was a Democrat in 2004. He endorsed Kerry, and then suddenly it's like, I'm a Republican, the Democratic Party's too liberal. Well, with Obama, like, well, can you describe the ways that Obama is dramatically more liberal than Kerry? Are you sure there's not some other thing?
It's just the one thing. Yeah.
And and there's a lot of Democrats. I mean, Manchin shifted. It's very clear. Manchin spent most of the Obama era attacking Obama, is far more able to work with his buddy Biden. He would never have worked with Hillary Clinton in the same way. We kind of know that, right? So that's sort of the schism. I don't know how to fix it. I've been, people have said, it's like, well, I get it. It's unfair. It sucks, but everyone gets the vote, and we don't get to throw out the unfair votes, right?
The only fix I see, and this is difficult, slow, uphill work, is to start identifying candidates at every level who are like genuinely exciting, you know, like who like because I and to give up the voters who are never coming back or who need to be bribed or wheedled because their instinct is to lean Republican and we're just desperately trying to yank them back over here, and to like, all right, let the Republicans have them. Can we make up those numbers by bringing in people from the left with candidates people can get genuinely like mobilized about? You know, I mean, it's like Obama was not like his positions were not wildly progressive, but he as a person was charismatic and exciting, and it felt
Mhm.
like we were part of a moment in history. He's a brilliant speaker, and so like where are people like that? Where it's like you don't even have to have fringe positions; you just have to be interesting, you know. And I think that was part of the frustration with Biden and the kind of Bidenization of what we think a safe candidate is that it's somebody who's not going to rock the boat too much. And maybe the fix is the boat has to be rocked
Mhm.
because that will at least get people mobilized and paying attention, and then like let the people who are Republicans at heart anyway
Yeah.
vote Republican, because we can make up those numbers by bringing in disaffected young progressives who are so frustrated that they aren't voting. And that might be like a lot of those might be Johnson people who
Yeah.
could be moved to the other side if they felt like what the Democrats were doing was in line with their values, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I would have thought January 6th, the election nihilism, but January 6th would have been a radical moment for a lot of these centrist Dems, just based on the fact of, wait a minute, they did this over Biden. They're
Right.
claiming Biden rigged this election. It's not,
There's no
not,
Democrat nice enough for them to like him.
it's not
Yeah.
they know his record. They know all this stuff. It's not Warren. This wasn't
Yeah.
Castro's best friend Sanders. This wasn't Castro, the who they might not have known very well. That's it was Biden, and if and the demonization of Biden, where literally, let's go Biden. So fuck you, old man. So saying fuck you to an 80-year-old man is somehow your mantra. Is These are people who are that should be radicalizing for us to realize these are unreachable people.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
hasn't.
Exactly.
That it's like maybe we're not nice enough to them. So we'll I would like to have you back on with Robin and me to also, as this continues. um I I regret, I hope we'll have a better kind of position after November, but I fear it might not. And I think we would like to really sort of, what do we
Have things to
do?
talk about either way.
What
Yeah.
do we do in this new scenario? So um thank you so much. Can you play us out with like your what your play is out and your book is out? So I want people to go
Oh,
get
yes, yeah. So my book is called The Rewind Files, and my play is called How Can I Keep From Singing, and it runs at University of Portland this weekend, October 5th through the 9th. You can get tickets on the UPU website, and you can also find me on Twitter at Claire Willett.
Yes, all that information will be below. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Claire.